Happy to speak with my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. We have a few things in common. We both collect cards and we both write. Uh, I don't know how our collections match up, but he's a much better writer than I am. I think that's a safe bet. So happy to have on Greg Bates. He's the Fanatics Collectible senior writer, writes like me a little bit for Sports Collectors Digest, some other areas as well. That's why I say he's really good. You never know where his articles or columns you might see him. So welcome, Greg. You get the tables turned on you a little bit here.
Thanks, John. Happy to be on.
All right. So, like I said, you collect cards. I know I spoke with you at the last national in Cleveland there. Kind of where, for you, when did the hobby start? How did it all begin for you?
I was a junk wax 80s kid. So, my height was basically 80, 86, 87 until about 92. I was big into baseball. I got into basketball like a little bit, early on in high school and stuff like that. But then I dropped off probably about 94 or so. So, like, I had, or 93 baseball. So I found some Jeters like from 30 years ago that were bricked that Jeter wasn't Jeter when I was collecting them. So, um, yeah, I kind of, stopped and got back into it probably 20 years later or so and have been, you know, collecting and writing and stuff with the hobby ever since.
What do you PC? Like, what moves your meter? Like, you're at a show, whether it be for work or for cards. What are you on the hunt for? What kind of piques your interest?
I was growing up, I was a big Twins fan, so I collected a lot of puckets. I was huge into puckets.
Yeah.
I had over a couple hundred puckets, and as like a 10-year-old, you're like, wow, this is a lot of cards in the mid '80s, mid to late '80s, and now I've kind of shifted to more vintage. Just I'm not looking at. I want really cool cards, but cards that will like hold some value as well. I'm not into flipping. I'm not into any of that, but I looked for I think a 52 Bowman Mickey Mantle is undervalued, underrated. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's a second Bowman release card, and the 52 tops is obviously huge too. But
That's
I
where I
think
thought you were
52.
going there for a second. I'm like, holy smokes.
So I looked for the 52, John, a 52 Bowman
Yeah.
for probably a couple years. I would go on eBay. I wasn't like oh, I'm going to go on in the morning. I'm going to go on in the afternoon. I'm going on the night. It was kind of, it wasn't this huge hunt, but I wanted to get a nice looking one with great eye appeal, corners that look pretty good, stuff like that. So I ended up pulling the trigger probably, it would have been late summer, probably last year. I got a PSA 3.5, which looks really nice. Probably paid a little bit more because the premium on it, because it looked really nice and everything. But I went for that, and then I started thinking, and I'm like, you know what? I'd like to do a run of vintage cards, probably post-war, from like 48-ish to 1970. Like my favorite card or so from each tops release, or it could be Bowman. But
Yeah.
and I'm gonna kind of do that. I picked up a 54 Aaron PSA 4 not too long ago. So I'm kind of piecing together. I'm gonna make a list at some point, and kind of look at what my favorite cards are from each of those years. And I mean, obviously, money's going to play a factor. I'd love to get a 52
Yeah.
tops, but that's not going to happen. The It's sailed on that, as you know, and probably with you as well. So,
Yeah. I don't,
um,
unless I win the
you
Mega
got to be a little
Millions.
selective.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Well, listen, an Aaron rookie and a four, a 3.5, 52 Bowman Mantle. Those are no slouches. Like you're not kicking no. I say this, I'm not kicking those out of bed. So those are two beautiful cards. And like you said, sometimes I think you'll agree too. I think sometimes we put too much. Like I get grading. I do grade cards. I'm a bulk subber. I get the whole aspect. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on the grade and not the eye appeal or what the card actually looks like. Like I got a card over my shoulder here. It's a Jackie Leaf rookie. That's a 1.5. But anyone that's seen it really up close will tell you it looks much better than the grade. And I love it. I love it, and it's my grail card, and you know,
Mhm.
and so sometimes we put too much, like we forget about the eye appeal or how the card presents, and I think that's important too. And especially if it's a card like you said, you're not a flipper, you're not buying it on Monday to move on Thursday, and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And so as long as we're happy with it as the owners of our cards, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's all about, and the grades will speak when it's time, and that sort of thing. So fully
Mhm.
get that, and those are great cards. You showed me even before. You don't have to show it or talk about, but you showed me another a more modern card that you acquired that's really top of the line, and made me a little jealous as well.
Yeah, I picked up my first Otani autograph. I'm like, it was right before the season. I think it might have been the first day of the Tokyo series. And
Yeah,
I thought his autos are starting to get, especially, this is a 2019 Topps Chrome update. So it's not a
yeah,
2018, but the 2018 ones they
yeah,
just price
yeah,
you out. I mean, you're already out. You're
yeah,
10, 12 grand for a PSA 10. So I'm
yeah,
like, I like the rookie cup. We like the rookie cup on there. So it's a 2019. It's his rookie card. Yeah, orange to 25. It's a really cool looking card. I kind
yeah.
of deviated from, like I said, I don't do a ton of modern, but I kind of deviated from my vintage quest, I guess, of 48 to 70. You know how you're looking and they're like,
Well, there's some
I
guys.
really like
Listen,
this card.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's some guys, right? You'll break the rules for, and I don't blame you. He's one in
Yeah.
my book, and the other guy I love is Bobby Witt Jr. He's a guy. I'm
Mhm.
more vintage guy too, Greg. But when if I see a Bobby Witt Jr. that catches my eye, I've been known to pick those up or buy those. So it's nice to have a rule or sort of a criteria, but what they say, criteria, you can there's always a loophole, or you can break a rule every now and then, and I think I'll stick up for us. I think with Otani and with Junior, those are not bad guys to break a vintage rule on, because I think they're obviously 5 tool ball players who I think are going to, years later, I don't think we'll regret any of those purchases. So I think when you look at it like that, I'm okay with breaking my vintage rule.
And the awesome thing is with Witt, obviously as a collector himself, it just makes it 10 times more
Yeah,
cool to
that
see
is
him.
pretty cool.
Yeah. I just did an
It was,
email interview with him
yeah,
about a month ago when he got on with Collects and did his
yeah,
little partnership. So his agent was really awesome to get through. He's like, he can do an email interview. He's not, because this was during spring training.
yeah,
I'm like, that's perfect. Let's do it.
yeah,
And he was awesome in answering the questions and just talking about his PC and everything else and why he wanted to get into, the card industry with his own money. So yeah, it was cool.
yeah. With an email interview, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not 100%. So
Mm.
you'll email like the question you want, and they'll just kind of take each one of those and then have a type response for it. Am I
Yeah, I
wrong?
sent him. I sent his agent like, I don't know, 7 or 8 questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, and he emailed back, and he would, each question was, he probably responded with three sentences each or
yeah,
so. It was good.
yeah,
It was good content. I ended up using a lot of it. But yeah,
yeah,
I I'm not a huge email interview fan because you can't really ask follow-ups, especially for like a
yeah,
pro athlete. I did an email interview with JJ Watt a number of years ago, and you can't follow up. That's the
yeah.
tough thing. So
So it's one
yeah,
email to them or their representative, and then one comes back with the answers to those
yep,
questions. And that's it.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, listen, hey, look, if they give definitive answers, and I mean that's half the battle. So it's better than no interview, as you probably well
hmm
know. So
yeah.
speaking of you know speaking of writing, was that something, even the younger Greg Bates, was that always something that you did or were into? In other words, like I wrote for my school newspaper. I don't
Mhm.
know how good or bad I was. I wouldn't say I even loved it. I just did it because I
Mhm.
was kind of asked to do it. My writing my fondness for writing grew as I did as I got older, I would say. But for you, was it something from an early age you knew you really had a love or a passion for, or not necessarily?
It kind of I like to write. I went to college at St. Cloud State, and I was in communications. I was going to do public relations and advertising. Didn't know necessarily want to go, and I always loved sports. I always want to do, I'd always thought about, sports PR for a, NFL team or NBA or something like that. But then I got into well, and I did clubs and stuff and I got a advertising public relations emphasis um, when I graduated and stuff. And then, I was looking for jobs and everything, and there was a newspaper job opening for a graphic designer at the town that I grew up in Minnesota. So I ended up taking that on for like 20 hours. And then they were looking for some sports writer help covering games, stuff like that. I wasn't big into graphic design stuff. Like I knew like newspapers were really cool and I love that. So I transitioned into writing then, and then that stuck from. So I was in started newspapers in 2001, and then I've been writing ever since, essentially, just for publications, newspapers, online, everything else. So yeah, it kind of once I got the bug, I guess, I started doing it all the time, and that's what it became. But it wasn't necessarily. I knew I wanted to do sports type writing, I guess, but journalism per se maybe wasn't exactly what I thought right away. So, but that's what it turned into, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. You're very good. I obviously read most of your stuff, and
Thank you.
you're very good at. Has the writing affected how you collect, or even the other way around, like what you collect affect your writing, or are they kind of two separate entities in themselves that are sort of mutually exclusive? How would you answer a question like that?
I'll tell you a funny story. So I used to do every year for Sports Collectors Digest before I went over to Fanatics, and I'm still doing some SCD stuff. Um, but I would do every year going into spring training, I would do like prospects to watch. And I would talk to a couple shop owners in Florida. And I would always talk to Lance Fisher, who is the president, founder of Onyx baseball cards. And
Yeah,
Lance is just a great guy. Anybody who's met him, they put out great cards. I mean, they're so small, but what he does and everything, he's
yeah,
such a passion for it. So I would talk to him, and he used to be um, a Florida State football recruiter. So that's how he got into, and the guy knows people, and he got into that, got into cards. So he knows, he goes down to, wherever and checks out all these prospects and gets to know these prospects. He knew, Wander Franco's name when Wander was probably, 14 years old, and other guys. So I would talk to Lance every year, kind of late February, early March, leading into the year, and he would kind of break down who he was, looking at every year as,
yeah.
we'd kind of look at the top 100 prospect list, and he'd be like, I love this guy. He should be moved up higher. This guy. And in 2019, I think it was, I said, can you give me a name? Because he's really good at this. Can you give me a name out of the top 150 people probably haven't heard of, but they're going to know who he is in a couple years? And he's like, there's this I don't know, 16, 17-year old named Julio Rodriguez, not in the top 150. He's going to be the number one prospect in a couple years. So then, I kind of I went on eBay after that, and it was, um, he had his first Bowman Chrome 2019. So I'm like, well, I'm going to take Lance's word for it. So I ended up pulling the trigger. I bought it was unnumbered, but it was his auto, Bowman Chrome auto, for $250. And when he went up when he was called up a couple years ago. Those shot up to like 3 grand each. I didn't sell, which I could have and made a nice profit, but I'm like, I'm gonna hold on to these. I think they're probably down to, I don't know, $1,200 maybe now, 12 to 15, I suppose. Um, but just like he called that when this kid
Yeah,
was 16 or 17 years old because he knew the makeup of these kids. He's like,
yeah,
Julio's going to be the face of the Mariners, and what Lance is telling me, I'm just like, he's so believable because he's had such luck with these players and stuff, and he's really good at finding these young guys and getting autos. I think he was the first to have like Julio autos. He was
yeah.
the first company to have Wander Franco and all these guys that people haven't heard of because they're 16 years old before, Tops even dives in there, or Panini or Leaf or anybody. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, Lance has been on the show. He, like you said, you
Mhm.
you 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 profiled him like perfectly. He knows
Mhm.
his stuff, smart, kind of can, I know it sounds weird, but almost read the DNA and kind of see that
Mhm.
guy before they pop. And he was right, with Julio, and
Mhm.
and they may be down a little bit, but he's got a lot. He's a five. We talk about 5'2" guys tonight.
Mhm.
He fits that bill too, and he's still
Mhm.
very young, and he is right now. I'd say he's probably the face of the Mariners and their best player. So
Mhm.
I don't think by holding. I don't think they're going to go down anymore. If anything, they might go right back up. So he's
Yeah.
dealt with a couple injuries here and there, a little nagging stuff. Nothing of the Mike Trout variety, if you
Yeah.
will. But yeah, I think you'll be all right there. But yeah, I love that story, right? Because there's like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm just picking this guy's brain for this piece, and now we've got that light bulb turns on, and I've had people not named Lance Fisher, Newman, look at this, or hey, let me tell you about this guy. Sometimes sometimes they're right,
Mhm.
sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes I do a little prospecting, not so much in recent years, but I used to do a lot more. And
Mhm.
sometimes I used to say if I can be right 6 out of 10 times, I'll take that.
You're batting
That means
600. That's pretty good.
yeah, I'll take that. It's when you go when you get 5 hits and 5 misses, or even worse, then you might come out on the short end of the stick.
Mhm.
We talked about interviews, email. You even do if you have to via email.
Mhm.
Most I this is something I get asked every once in a while from when I do my Q&A type things for Hobby Quick Hits, and sometimes people or even in person, someone will ask me, John,
Mhm.
if you can't say it on the air, but what was like your most contentious interview? Who was it? Or if you can't say, just kind of hit around or what happened. And I really don't have one. I've talked about it outwardly. It's not a secret. For me, it's Brian Gray. I kind of called him out on some stuff I thought wasn't very becoming of a CEO at the time. I wouldn't say it was contentious, but it wasn't the most, friendliest of interviews, if you will. I mean, for
Mhm.
you, do you have one that kind of sticks out and what you can share? If you don't want to mention a name, and that's completely understandable.
Yeah, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago. I was working on a story for SCD, and I was calling out. I don't remember what it was for, but I was calling out to some California shops, and I called this random California shop and said, "Hi, this is who I am. I'm working on a story for Sports Collectors Digest. Blah 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 blah." And I just said, "I'd like to. Would you have time to talk and stuff?" And this shop owner made the biggest deal that he wanted me to send him credentials. Like he thought I was lying about calling for Sports Collectors Digest, or a publication. Like, why would I lie about this? It was just a normal story too, and it wasn't like, it was so crazy. And I talked to him for a few minutes. I'm just like, this is ridiculous. So I hung up and I made a note in my planner, like, bad talker. Don't ever call this guy. Wrote his name down, wrote the shop name down. I'm like, don't ever call that number again. And it's just like, and I'll write down really good, people who are really good to talk to, really good shop owners and stuff, and I'll talk to them on a consistent basis for stories and stuff. But that guy just like, what did I have to win by lying about who I was?
I
It was
need
the
to
most
see.
ridiculous
I
thing
need to
ever.
see your
Yeah,
badge number, your driver's license, and
yeah.
yeah, that's that. There, that's a. Let me ask you this: you don't have to mention them.
Mhm.
Do you know, like, are they still operational? Are they still open?
Oh,
You
I
ever
could
like
I could
just
probably
for
check, but I still have it written down who it is for
yeah,
sure.
all right. Well, you have to
Yeah,
get back to me
yeah.
on that one. That's yeah, it's fun. And listen, even if like so you know what I mean, you provide all that, which is an odd
Hmm.
request, like you said. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you like will write good or bad. Like you could still write a
Hmm.
bad review or not be flattering. It has nothing to do with credentials themselves, right? I mean, all
Right.
writers can write a nice piece about somebody or something, or they can, if the facts tell otherwise, they'll speak what the truth is, and it is
Hmm.
what it is. Like the credentials itself, really doesn't sway that either way. The piece,
Hmm.
it's what the writer's going to write. You know what I mean? Whether you're licensed or unlicensed, it is what it is. But maybe
And
that was, yeah. Go ahead.
most shop owners, John, are really happy these days because they know it's good publicity,
Free
right?
pub.
It's your
Yeah.
name is out there, your business is out there. It's like, most places when I call and say, "Hey, I work for Tops," they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome! Where are we going to be seen?" And they get it, like it's free publicity, like you said, and you usually don't have an issue, and they're more than happy. And most owners are exceptional about wanting to talk and take that time because they know it's important.
The only thing without knowing who it is or any of the other details, like
Mhm.
maybe he just didn't want to do it, and rather than just be honest and say, "Hey, I'm not interested," that was his way of like getting out. Like some people have a
Mhm.
hard time saying no directly, and that was just his way of saying no without saying no. I'm just
He
throwing.
might have
It's
gotten
just a
he
tip.
might have gotten burned by an interview once. You never know.
Yeah, yeah, that's something. But yeah, you
Yeah.
never know. I get asked even on this show, and I'm very open with this. I'm not maybe not going to mention everybody, but there's people I ask to come on that just will either politely decline or not even decline, just won't respond to a request. That's actually probably the more common way
Mhm.
of whether a publicist doesn't forward it, they don't see it themselves. Sometimes it's just like crickets, and
Mhm.
that comes with the territory. I don't. One thing I've learned, doing this 6 years now, is like not to take any of that stuff too personal. The only time I'll
Yeah.
take something personal if someone says something negative, and even then, like as long as they use some tact, you know what I mean? Like, hey, I don't agree with what you said here, John, or on this. That's fine because they're both opinions. No one's really wrong. We can only be wrong or right on facts. Opinions are our own. So I've learned not to take stuff too personal, especially if it's not made personal. And some people I think are better at it than others. And I just think it's one of those things over years I've kind of gotten better at being like that. But
Mhm.
sometimes someone you might want them to come on a show, you might want them to do an interview for a column and article, and they just don't have that same want or desire, and it is what it is. And I've had people. I'm sure this might ring true with you too, Greg. I've had
Mhm.
people say no, and eventually they've come on for whatever
Mhm.
reason. No
Mhm.
wasn't a permanent no; it was just no at that at time of asking. So um, that's why you never really. That's why I try not to even burn a bridge because it may be a no in the moment, but a month later, 6 months later, a year later, or even longer, like hey, they're agreeing to come on or do just an interview for like a written piece, like much
Mhm.
like you do. So You never know. No is just a two letter word in the moment, right? That can always change. But you do a little travel for what you do. But I mean, as a collector too, you go to the shows. We've
Mhm.
seen the national this year kind of change leadership. You've been to more than one national, so you've seen it in different. Is to you is the national like your favorite show, or even on a local level? Do you? How many shows would you say you get to a year?
With the national, I mean, I do a few local shows a year, and then the national is always the one. It's the one-stop shop, right? You can get anything that you want.
Yeah,
Like John Brosia used to tell me, if there's something you want and you can't find it at the national, it doesn't exist. And which is so true. It's gotten a little crazy the last few years with the crowds and just everything
yeah,
else, and just Cleveland was a little rough. Um, some areas and stuff like that. Chicago's my favorite. It's 3 hours drive for me. It doesn't take a whole day to fly there, stuff like that. Atlantic City was not ideal. So, and I know dealers, love Chicago because it's in and out, a lot easier for them. You always get the people on the West Coast saying, "Hey, come back to Anaheim, come back over here, come back to that." But Chicago's that central location that works really well. Um, yeah, I've been to the last. Boy, I think the last one I missed was 2018. Was that
2018
Atlantic
was
City?
Chicago, I believe.
Oh no, 29 was 2019 Atlantic City then?
Yeah,
So
no,
that would have been the
29.
last one I missed.
Well, Atlantic City, the one Atlantic City one was canceled
Mhm.
with COVID.
Right.
Then it didn't look like they were going to go
Oh, maybe
back.
it was
And then when,
Cleveland in 19 or
yeah,
whatever, right?
yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I'm losing track too. Don't feel bad.
So I went
It
to
all
I
becomes
went
a
to
blur.
15, 17, 19, 21, 22, 23, 24, and then this year. So I think that's 8 or something. So 8 out of the last 9 or something, like 9 or 10. So yeah, it's always I love the national just because I ran it's so crazy because there's so many people there, but I literally ran into you last year, right? It
Yeah,
was just
more
like
than once. More
I
than
know
once.
it's
Mo-
crazy. Like there's 100,000 people there, and you run into people like,
Yeah, and
oh
then
hey,
you
it's
try
John.
to find, and then you try to find somebody,
Yeah,
and then you can't, and then you
right.
exchange a message after the show, like, "Hey, man, I missed you. Sorry,
Yeah,
we didn't." Like so. It's you never
yeah.
know. It's just it's funny, and I always tell people like make a if make a like a rendezvous point, like, "Hey, I'll meet you at three
Hmm.
o'clock in front of this food truck or whatever
Hmm.
landmark you want to use." Otherwise, sometimes it may not happen, or it'll just like you just said, it'll happen by happenstance. Like it'll just be
Hmm.
one of those spontaneous things. Like you just, I think we saw each other 3 or 4 times to the point
Yeah,
where we had talked so much we just kind of waved, having a good
yeah,
day. Yeah. So
yeah.
it's just it's odd how that works, and then someone else
Yep.
you're trying to look for or find, and you're like, man, where is this person? So
Yeah.
it's like where's Waldo? Like trying to find him.
I
So
love the national just because it's the one time of the year get to see a lot of these people who I talk to on the
yeah,
phone, and like who I've become close with even as a writer,
yeah,
these
yeah,
CEOs and everything that you don't get to see them much. You get the chance to talk to them, and just how important it is to see all these people in person. And that's the big thing. I spend, for 5 days on there, I spend a lot of that time just walking around and talking to people. If it's, you know, people I haven't seen, or doing interviews and stuff. I leave like the national last year after like 5 days there, and I'm like, I feel like I didn't get a chance to look at much
yeah,
because it's just so
yeah.
busy, you know?
Every year I try to like quadrant it out. Like I'm going to do this section, and that's the goal
Mm,
for today, amongst
mhm,
my other things that are on the itinerary.
mhm,
And like you just said, I always did. I see every table. I feel like I didn't. I know I didn't. I don't
mhm,
even. It's not even a feel like I know I missed something. Just it's that big.
mhm,
And someone says I can. Someone asked me, John, I can only go for a day. What's your recommendation? And I'm like, it's going to be tough to do everything in a day. So if you only can go for a day, really pick the stuff you want to do, because the day goes
Mhm.
quick. The day,
Mhm.
this, I'm preaching to the choir here, probably, Craig. The day
Yeah.
like, even though it's a long day and your feet hurt and other parts of your body hurt, the time
Mhm.
itself goes fast, and even the week, even the 5 days, you're like, that's it. And
Yeah.
so if you're only going for a day, as a few people, ask me for kind of strategy, I'm like, don't I said, I'm not trying to tell you to be rude, but if you're going to do a lot of stopping and talking with people, that's going to consume a good portion of your day, and you're
Mhm.
not going to see a lot of the tables. So you really got to decide what your goal for the day is, to card shop or socialize. And neither wrong one's a wrong answer. It's
Mhm.
just you have one day to pick one of the two. It's very hard to do both in one day. You can do that in a 5 day span for sure, but in one
Mhm.
day it's hard to balance both of those. So for the one
Yeah.
day folks, I always say you've got to, like, what's the priority? Seeing people you haven't seen in a while, and that sort of thing. And I can't, that's for them to answer, but I always, 2 days would be like, someone asked me that question. What's the least amount you could go and still maybe feel like you did most of the stuff? And so 2 to 3 days is my answer there. But if you can go like we do 4 or 5 days, that's obviously
Mhm.
the most ideal. But I get it. Not everyone can get the time off. For me, it works nice because I'm in the teaching industry and it's summertime,
Mhm.
and so I'm in a sense I'm already off. I mean, I'm at summer school, but it's a lot easier to get out of summer school than regular school year. So I just let them know, hey, these 3 days, I'm not going to be in summer school. It's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and see you Monday, and they're good with that. And so I'm fortunate. Not everyone has that luxury, let's say. So it might be,
Mhm.
hey, I can take a Friday off and do Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, or I got to get on my plane early Sunday, so I only have 2 days. But so I guess just try to come up with a game plan as best you can for based on the amount of days you're there, and one day will whenever someone says I'm only coming for one day, I'm like, oh man, that's gonna be tough. You
Yeah.
know, do the best you can, move at a pretty brisk pace. Yeah, and sometimes if you're there for cards, sometimes you have to wait to get in front of some showcases. Wait your so
Mhm.
that you lose time there if you're trying to see a certain dealer and their wares and what they're offering. So one day is definitely, if I only had to go for one day, I'm obviously with travel. I'm not going to do that for one day. And
Mhm.
I like going back to kind of some of the venues you mentioned, Atlantic City and Cleveland. I like them for the selfish reason for me, Greg, is I can drive to them,
Mm.
so I can kind of come and go as I please at my car.
Mhm.
Chicago, I'm not going to argue that it might not. It's probably the best venue as far as for the logistics of the show itself. But for me, it's 14 hours, so now I
Mhm.
have to fly. I can't just, it's sometimes it's tricky finding a later flight on a Sunday to get there to stay on a Sunday. This year I'm going. I'm renting a car, which
Mm.
I haven't done in the years past at Chicago. This year I'm going to do that because I'm staying, a little over 3 miles away from the venue. And I thought about not renting a car. I'm like, well, I could just Uber, But when I figured out what, like, those Uber each day, it's going to
Mhm.
cost what a rental car would anyway. And so
Mhm.
you might as well just rent a car, and then you can, help others and give friends rides and people
Mhm.
rides to different events. So I went with the rental car where I
Mm.
hadn't done that prior. So um, that's, I don't want to say it's an inconvenience. It's an added expense. Let's be honest. That
Mm.
so it's a little more costly to go to Chicago for me than Atlantic City or Cleveland would be. Is it a deterrent? No, but just means I have less money probably for a card or two that maybe I'd buy, if it was in Atlantic City or
Mhm.
Cleveland. It's going to be in Chicago the next this year and the following two, and then we'll see. I know, like you said, you're 3 hours away, so it's ideal
Mhm.
for you.
Mhm.
Taking that out of the equation, would you like to see it move around more, or are you comfortable with it being, and this is for you personally, like you're
Mhm.
fine if it was Chicago every year?
I mean, I'd like to go check out different cities and stuff, but you get to know Chicago pretty well too because it's there every other year at least, right? So you get to know the restaurants, you get to know where to park. It's not the unknown every time you go. I didn't know anything really about Cleveland or the outskirts of Cleveland going there. So you just don't know. Yeah, with Chicago, it's we've been there for so many times, right? It's every other year for the last like dozen years at least 15 years. So um I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes Chicago permanently. There's been talk about that. You've probably heard that for a number of years. That I don't know if that would take a vote from the dealers or the board or what happens with that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that turns permanent, maybe even after this 3-year stretch that they get so comfortable, the newer guys get so comfortable in having Chicago that it just turns into that every year.
Yeah, that's just I can't argue the centrality of the city. It's in right pretty much in the dead center.
Mhm.
So for whether you're East Coast or West Coast, you're gonna have to travel similar. If you're obviously in the Midwest or near Chicago, you're probably gonna love that if you're in driving distance. And I get it. I just said how I loved Atlantic City and Cleveland for the selfish reason that I could drive there. It's 5 hours literally. So
Mhm.
I get that. I like seeing different cities. Last year was the first time, like you mentioned, um, I was ever in Cleveland. I don't. Maybe it's because of where I'm a product of my environment, Greg. I'm a New York City kid, born and
Mhm.
raised, so I'm not so much intimidated by a big city where maybe someone else, and I don't mean this like the way it sounds, but someone else who maybe didn't grow up in that sort of setting could be. I get it. So I don't mind like kind of a city I'm not familiar with. Um, but I get it too. I think Chicago's just a very for dealers, for people who attend the show. It's very popular. I'll say this: I'd rather be in Chicago every year because that's a rumor I've heard than the other rumor I've heard where doing two nationals per calendar year. That's something that I
Mhm.
hope doesn't happen. We have other shows in other cities, like
Mhm.
Atlanta and on the West Coast with Burbank and others, and the East
Mhm.
Coast National and White Plains and that sort of thing. I know it's not the same show and not even it's apples and oranges, but now with Fanatics Fest trying to kick off again, and we know they did it in New York. So I
Mhm.
rather see it in one locale each year, the same one, than to see it like it's going to be in Chicago and Atlanta, the two nationals. The national in end of July and the national in February or November, or whatever that they would ever schedule a second one. So that's how I don't want to see two nationals because I feel even if they did that, the
Mhm.
bloom would come off the rose, right? The national
Yeah.
has that mystique, and it's you circle that week on your calendar every year, and it's really the
Mhm.
same week for the most part
Mhm.
every year, and you kind of know what days you're going to need to have off or block off on your planner and schedule.
Yeah.
And I think if you do two, it's you do two. There's one World Series every year. There's one Super Bowl. If sports start doing two of them, I think it loses the overall luster. So
Mhm.
I don't think that's going to happen. But I've heard rumblings here and there. People can say anything, right? Doesn't mean it's the powers that be. So I'll sign up for Chicago every year rather than two nationals every year.
In how many, like, if we get 600 dealers at the normal national, how many of those are going to go and do it again? Because a lot of those guys, are pushing 25, 30, 35 years they've been doing this. They're not going to travel more than once a year, right?
Yeah. Well, the other rumor I heard, again, where these rumors come from, anyone can make them up. I don't know if they're coming from, credible sources or just people just planting like thoughts and seeds out there to get that idea rolling. But the one thing I
Mhm.
heard is with the two nationals, one will be like a vintage heavy national, almost like what Strongsville is,
Okay.
where the vintage dealers will be there and definitely have table there. And the second national, if you want to, whatever you called that, will be more modern, ultra modern, and that sort of thing. And the vintage
Mm.
dealers won't feel like they have to be at both places, or the modern dealers won't have to feel like they have to be in both places.
Mhm.
So I still don't want to see that. You know what I mean? Like, even if that's the criteria or that's
Mhm.
sort of the differentiator between two nationals, I just think one national, right? If you're going to do, they did that a little bit. Like, if you look at the way it's kind of laid out, you see a lot of the vintage dealers are together. They're not 100%, but there's a good. If you really look at it, they're it's kind of done that way, whether it's intentional or just because they have the same spot or close to the same spot. So
Mhm.
I just don't want to see two nationals. I think if number one, I won't be able to attend both, and then it becomes which one do I go to, right? And when there's only one, it's just like, am I going or am I not going? It's pretty cut and dry, right? So I
Mhm.
don't want to see two nationals, whether that's selfish and most people have asked that question. I don't know if I've even got someone to say that. The only answer I got where they kind of said they wouldn't mind is what I just said. If one national was all vintage and the other national was not vintage. And I've
Mhm.
had people say, well, I know which one I would have to go to because of what I collect. It makes my decision easy. But I kind of do a little of both. Like, I'm not like I'm heavier vintage, don't get me wrong, but as a dealer myself, right? Sometimes I will buy modern or ultramodern, even if it's just for showcase inventory or stuff for myself,
Mhm.
for my own show. So I like the fact that I can go to one national and buy either or if I so choose. I don't really, you know, and just the expense, right? You're going to pay for two shows, two nationals rather than one. And it'd be interesting the corporate, right? If your Fanatics, Tops, Panini, all the wild card, we could go on and on. The grading
Mhm.
companies. Now you've got another national to do all the logistics and who's going and hotel, and it doubles your costs, and that stuff adds up even for a big company. I'm
Mhm.
complaining as a individual proprietor, but as a bigger company, they might have a
Mhm.
staff of 25 to 50 people, and or so I hope they keep it to one national. If it's Chicago every year, so be it. I'll have to fly, um, and it is what it is. I'm not gonna. It's not about a pity party, but I like
Mhm.
sometimes when I can drive to them too. So if it come back to Cleveland, or if it come, like to see it in Baltimore again. I've never been. I've been to Baltimore, not for the Nationals been in Baltimore, so I didn't attend that. But it's been there before. Maybe someday it could be there again. I'm a person who I like to be fair about it. I'm an East Coast guy, but if I lived on the West Coast, I'd be like, hey, what about us, right?
Mhm.
So I like to see it. You travel if it's like you said, Chicago for 2 years, then another city, then back to Chicago, just to get a different look every once in a while. If they want to make Chicago kind of the main home base of it, I'm not going to argue with that. It's proven to be like the consensus favorite. So I just don't want to see two nationals, but they're not asking me to vote on that. So who knows what will come down the pike. All right, so we're coming down the home stretch here, Greg. You cover the hobby. You see
Mhm.
all the breaking news, the stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Is anything, and like you said, you've been in the hobby, you've seen it through the years. Does anything surprise you anymore, or you're at the point where nothing catches you off guard or surprises you too much anymore?
I don't think anything surprises me. No, I think, we've kind of been through it all. I mean, you see stuff like the theft in Dallas at the show and just how elaborate that was with the people and all that. I mean, I don't know if that surprises me, but it's just kind of shocking in that manner that they would go about it and do something like that. I've written stories on forgeries, big forgery stuff. They just arrested the guy in McKinney, Texas, Wendell Rogers, who I wrote a huge story on 5 years ago. We tracked him down, stuff like that. I don't know. You just go through, you know, a lot of these sketchy things in the hobby, and you just try to concentrate on all the good things and all the good people in the hobby. And but yeah, I don't think it really surprises me just what happens. We've kind of seen it all in this hobby, and like you said, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And most of it is good, and most of the people are good, and most of them are in it for the correct reasons. But there's always going to be those bad seeds, and everything else who are just in it for the money and everything else. But yeah, I don't know. We've seen it all, and we're going to see it all again. So
Yeah.
no, I don't think anything really surprises me with it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And theft and burglaries, that's not just a hobby exclusive. That's any kind of entity or business
Right.
that's has money behind it or potential money. You're going to see that. Like you said, maybe the brazenness of some of the more
Mm.
recent thefts and that sort of thing make you open your eyes a little bit. The one story which happened really recently that really, I don't, I guess I'll say surprise. Really, the whole cat scanning of cases and boxes. Um, when I was a young kid, I suffered from migraines. Thankfully, I grew out of them, but we couldn't get them under control. I was missing school, and so I had to have my brain CAT scan. They wanted to see if they could see what was going on, or form some sort of plan of attack. So I've been in, as a young kid, a CAT scan. And if you would have told me that, and I was collecting cards as a kid, if you would have told me then that, hey, buddy, they're going to use this machine many years later to kind of see what's in the packs without opening them, I would have thought you were like kidding. You know what I mean? Like it's I wouldn't have thought about that. And yet here,
Mhm.
2024, 25, we're using medical equipment, medical imaging equipment specifically to see what's in a product without having to take the shrink wrap off. And that just shows you like the lengths people will go to, be, deceitful and underhanded to get one up on consumers and that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean that's the closest to surprise when that news broke. I'm like, "Well, what's
Mhm.
next?" That was my net line was two words like what's next. Like we're using
Yeah.
CAT scan, basically MRIs to look at what's in what are we going to do next. And so that's probably the closest the surprise that I've been. And but again, I've done this for 40 years, so nothing
Mhm.
catches me too off guard, but there's just some things that make you scratch your head. And then you got your sad stories too, right? The robbery ring that stole a lot of Yogi Berra's awards and memorabilia from his playing career, and not selling it to but literally melting it for the melt value where you can never
Mhm.
get that back. It's gone. That
Mhm.
stuff is like the sad stories and that sort of thing. So but like you said, for every bad story or sad story, there's 10 to 15 great stories of people doing great things or charity work or helping
Mhm.
someone else out. And sometimes I think it's something I try to cover. I know you're like that. I
Mhm.
do cover some of the bad stuff more as cautionary tales rather than trying to gloss about them. But
Mhm.
um, I try to definitely cover those uplifting stuff or the better ones because there's a lot more of those, and I think sometimes we don't do enough. And I'm not just talking about us; I'm just talking about the hobby in
Yeah.
general that we don't do enough to uh, you know cover those type of stories.
Yeah, and that's what I do a lot with Fanatics Collectibles. We write for, a lot about tops collectors and just like we write about I write about the everyday collector, not the Ken
Yeah,
Kendricks of the world or the Marshall Fogels of the world who have just amazing collections and endless money. It's these people
yeah,
that I wouldn't say they're living paycheck to paycheck, but they have really cool collections and they're budgeting this and
yeah,
doing that. And that's where all the cool stories come out. And I come up with a lot of those um, to write about the feel good stuff. Like I just interviewed a guy, story will be coming out, I don't know, next few weeks or so, but had a shop in Colorado had posted and said this guy's been collecting tops since 1959. So I contacted him and he's like, well, he said he's 83 and collected from 52 to 59 and then took a little break, had kids and stuff, or took a little break, was in the service and all this. And then 1982, Ripken's rookie year, his son was born. So he started collecting again. So he's been collecting since 82 continuously.
yeah,
But, so he had cool stories about it. I asked him, what was it like collecting in 1952? And, him with the bike spokes and making the motorcycle noises and everything
yeah,
else. And saying he had all these Mickey Mantles and but just to pick, and I talked to the shop owner in Colorado or the former shop owner who's a manager there still at Mike's Stadium Sports Cards in Aurora, Colorado. And
yeah,
Mike was just telling me about what it's like to have this guy coming in. And he's like, I don't want it to sound, bad or whatever, but Mike is like, we need to honor these guys. They're almost like veterans who they're a
yeah.
dying
Well,
breed,
listen,
right? It's
yeah,
it's the World War II
you
guys.
yeah,
So
you just hit the nail on the head of what I was going to say. Is I hope
yeah,
they live as long as they can, but that's not
yeah,
how life works. And to get to
yeah.
talk to someone that can relay those and share those experiences, we're going to run out of those folks. That's just the way it goes.
You
And
know.
so to be able to talk to them and get that perspective firsthand, right? That's a firsthand account.
Mhm,
Um, there's going to be a day where there'll be no first-hand accounts. So when you
mhm.
can get them, and I love that stuff because they're
Yeah.
few and far between. You know, I had my dad on this very podcast twice
Mm,
in 6 years. Not because he was my dad. I mean, that doesn't hurt, but he's 88 years old and he collected,
mm,
and he told stories of that and growing up in Brooklyn and Babe Ruth passing away or when the Dodgers left Brooklyn and went to the West Coast and people
mm,
crying on the street. Those folks, like my dad's 88, right? Those folks there's less of them each and every year to share
mhm,
those stories. And when I was thinking about it, I'm like, I need to have someone on. And I was like, I know this sounds terrible, but I didn't think of my dad like instantly. And I'm like, oh
mm.
my God. Like I almost was reluctant because he was my dad. Like someone say, "Oh, Newman's having his dad on," but like
Yeah.
there's very few people who can check those boxes. He happens to be one of them. We just happen to share a last name, and
Mhm,
my dad. So, um, it was. I loved having him on. The second time I had him on was when Gil Hodges was inducted. He's a
mm,
Brooklyn Dodgers kid who pretty
mhm,
much grew up at Ebbets Field. So I got his kind of thoughts on
mm,
Gil Hodges finally getting in. But like you said, those guys are those folks. There's less of them, and so to get to speak to them while they're here, I think. And then preserve that history, right? And sometimes we forget kind of what we do. Some of the impact of what we do is we get that's captured forever
mhm,
for people to read or view or however they consume content. So it's important on both sides, right? It's important for them to share their experiences and their stories, and it's important for us to capture them and and have them have that legacy be told. So I love that stuff, and
Yeah.
the significance and impacts, not lost on me. I think it's very important, and
Mhm.
you don't need me to tell you this, but yeah, you're very good at what you're doing and capturing that. Well, I appreciate you, Greg. You're a busy guy,
Yeah.
making some time for us and sharing some of your insights and experiences yourself. I always give the guests sort of the last word here. Anything they want to share, websites, social media, where they can see your stuff. Take your time and give that stuff out so people can check it out.
Yeah, so our platform at Fanatics Collectibles, we have a site called Ripped. And it talks about, it does, like I said, collector stories that I do. Um, but it's a lot of educational components as well. Like when 2025 Topps Baseball came out, there's just endless stories about what's in the box. So if it's a collector who wants specific things out of that, hey, you know, the hobby box is for you. If they want this, the jumbo might be for you, or the blaster box might be for you, or cool new inserts. Like I'll talk to like I just did a story on. We don't do a whole lot of F1, but a really cool one-on-one Max Verstappen was pulled from they call it the helmet collection, and it's a really awesome shot with the gold vinyl like in the background, and it's a cool shot of him with his visor on and stuff. So I ended up talking to like the project the brand managers and stuff for that. How did they come up with this idea, and how was that all done and handed off to the design team and everybody through that? And so you get some really cool like behind the scenes
Yeah,
stuff as well that we're putting out. So obviously we're not putting out real negative stuff because that's not what this is about. It's positive
yeah,
stories, but a lot of stuff obviously, and there's going to be a lot more once Fanatics gets the basketball license, later this
yeah.
year, and then football next year. There's going to be a lot of cool collector stories and stuff like that. But it's just endless stories. But you can find us at ripped ripped.tops.com. And then you can kind of move over to the top site too and check that out. But a lot of cool content on that. Check that stuff out. You can follow me on X or Twitter. I call it Twitter all the time.
I
I
still
can't get
do
into
too.
into the X thing.
Yeah,
So it's Greg A Bates at Greg A Bates for Twitter. So check that out. And I post a lot of hobby related stuff on that too. So yeah, there's my spiel.
all right. Well, listen, I appreciate it, and I'll see you hopefully here in what jeepers, 4 months, I think,
Yeah.
now a little under 4 months in Chicago. Drivable for you. I'm jealous and envious, but it's still the national, right? We still only have one a year, and we circle it every year that week, and it's a blast. It goes quick, and then we start counting the days down to the next one. So, uh,
Yeah.
well, I'm sure I'll run into you. It has to work out like that. So, but thanks, Greg.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you.